Hey everyone, Robert Ferringo with Doc Sports. You can find me at www.docsports.com. Now, last week we did a video talking about 4 reasons why you should be betting on the NFL preseason. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to bet on the NFL preseason. Now, this is one of those topics I could talk about for hours, honestly, but I'm going to try and just give you some of the basics and give you kind of a foundation for what to look for and how to handicap these NFL preseason games. Now, the NFL preseason is a completely different animal than betting on the regular season. But football is football, betting is betting, and the preseason is different, but it's still just kind of a substructure of the overall NFL betting season. There's some different things that you have to look for and some different indicators, but all in all, it's still a beatable market. Now, the number one thing that you want to consider when betting the NFL preseason is motivation. Motivation is everything. Motivation is the alpha and the omega of NFL preseason betting. And the bottom line is that some teams care about winning in the preseason and some just don't. Some care about performing in August and some just don't. And you need to be able to pinpoint which teams fall into which categories. Now, for example, you may have certain teams that have playoff and Super Bowl aspirations. A team like the Chiefs with an established coach, established system, they're looking ahead to laying a foundation for January games and getting to a Super Bowl. Do you think that they care about August football and that they're going to be motivated in the slightest to play this year? I don't think so. Another thing to look for when looking for motivation is teams with more veterans, older rosters. Those guys don't want to play in the preseason. They're going to sit games out. They're going to play less than teams that have younger, hungrier rosters are, or teams that have more position battles. More veteran, more established teams are just going to be less motivated. An example is the Atlanta Falcons. They have one of the oldest rosters, oldest projected rosters going into the regular season. There's just not going to be any motivation for a potential playoff team with a lot of older guys and star players that they're going to be more willing to rest for the regular season. Now, on the other hand, maybe you do have some younger, hungrier, up-and-coming teams that are going to be a little bit more aggressive this year. A team like the Green Bay Packers, a team like the Oakland Raiders. Last year, Oakland had one of the oldest rosters in the NFL. This year, they have one of the youngest. Throw in the fact that they're going to be on Hard Knocks and the fact that they do have so many positions up for grabs, I think that, and the fact that they're probably not going to be very good in the regular season, I could see them taking the preseason a little bit more seriously than some other teams. Now, the basic thing with motivation is this. It really all starts with the head coach. These are the guys that set the tone. And just like we have some teams that do or don't care about it, it's the same thing with coaches. Some coaches have a completely aggressive, forward-thinking, we want to win these games approach to the NFL preseason. Pete Carroll is one of those guys. Mike Shanahan was always one of those guys. On the flip side, you have a lot of coaches that really just don't care at all. They're just trying to work on a few things, get their teams healthy, in shape, and ready for the regular season. Tony Dungy was always like that. His Colts teams with Peyton Manning were notoriously terrible during the preseason. Excuse me. Another team right now, Andy Reid. Andy Reid's teams are like that. Andy Reid does not take the preseason very seriously. Okay? So over a long enough time frame, you start to see those patterns emerge by looking at some of the against the spread trends on coaches. And I will actually post a list on Twitter, on my Twitter account, at Ferringo Picks, that will list probably the top 5 or 10 best coaches to bet on and the top 5 or 10 coaches to bet against based on their against the spread records over the last 10 or 15 years. And again, you see the patterns emerge. Some coaches care about these games, some absolutely do not. Now, there are other types of non-coach related motivation to play, all right? Position battles can influence a team in a major way, especially when we're talking quarterbacks. Great example this year is the Washington Redskins. Right now they have 3 guys competing for one spot at the top of that quarterback depth chart. That Redskins team is going to be a little bit more focused, a little bit more motivated, and if they're getting better quarterback play, 1 through 3 quarterbacks, then that's going to give them a big advantage, and that's going to be a team we're going to be looking to bet on. Another type of motivation within the NFL preseason is teams coming off blowout wins or blowout losses. Now, letdown situations and bounce back situations, that's kind of a fundamental handicapping concept during the regular season. It's taken kind of to the extreme during the preseason. If a team in the preseason gets blown out by 21, 24, 30 points one week, you know that coaching staff is going to be all over those guys all week, and they're going to come back with a lot more energy and effort the following week. So those are some of the things, but motivation is the number one thing that we are looking to handicap in the preseason. Number two, you have to remember that each week is its own season. As I just touched on, there are wild swings in performance in the preseason because teams are playing so many guys. If a team gets hammered one week, they're probably not going to get blown out the next week, and vice versa. If a team comes out, executes, the starters and the backups pounce all over someone, and they end up winning by 27 points, those guys are going to be a little fat, dumb, and happy going into next week's game, and maybe they won't have that same type of energy level. Week one is all about new coaches and teams with something to prove, teams with chips on their shoulders from last year. New coaches, I'll talk about that a little bit in a second, are guys that want to come out and prove to their fans, the ownership group that hired them, the media that covers them. They want to prove to everyone that they were the right man for the job. So they are going to be a little bit more anxious in those opening week games. Also, teams that maybe underperformed last year, teams like the Jaguars, teams like the Steelers, all right, I look for them to be a little bit more aggressive and to take these early week games or early preseason games a little bit more seriously than a team like, let's say, the New England Patriots or the Philadelphia Eagles. Week 2 and 3, that's when we get into those quarterback battles. You really see those teams start to put forth more effort than some other teams that are maybe a little bit more established and that are still playing backup quarterbacks because you have an Aaron Rodgers or you have a Tom Brady that just isn't going to get many snaps in the preseason. So week 1 is about new coaches and teams with something to prove. Weeks 2 and 3 are about quarterback competitions and those bounce back, letdown situations that we already talked about. Now, injuries are another big factor to consider. If a team goes out and, let's say in week 2 of the preseason, they lose a lot of guys to injury, it is a natural reaction going into that week 3 game that they're going to be a little bit more hesitant and a little bit more cautious with some of their guys. So injuries can completely change the mindset of how these teams approach the preseason. Number 3, the number 3 thing that we're looking for when handicapping the NFL preseason is scheduling. Scheduling can play a role. It plays a role in the regular season. It's one of the things that not a lot of people talk about. And it plays a role in the preseason. Some teams have a long way to travel. Some teams hold their training camps in other parts of the country that are not that close to where they play their games. The Dallas Cowboys, for example, holding camp out in Oxnard, California, they got to travel a lot during the regular season. They got to fly back to Dallas to play games. They have to go on the road and play other teams. That can impact teams severely early on in the season. Another thing about the scheduling is that every team is not playing on Sunday. These preseason games basically go from Thursday to Monday, and the teams are kind of evenly spread out. So what you can have is a team play on Sunday one week, Thursday the next week, or play on Monday one week and Friday the next week. So you find these teams getting caught on short weeks a lot more than you would during the regular season, and that's going to be an instance where coaches are going to be more likely to rest starters, rest guys, be careful with players because they're playing 2 games in 5 days. Or there have been instances where a team has had, a few years ago, the Giants had to play 3 games in 11 days. All right? Look for those little scheduling quirks when you're handicapping the preseason. Also, some teams get scheduled with back-to-back home games, back-to-back road games during the preseason. One of my favorite angles is you look at a team that's playing back-to-back home games. They lose that first home game. Nobody wants to lose 2 home games in a row, not during the regular season, not during the preseason, whatever. You're playing in front of your family, your friends, your fans, your ownership group, everybody in the community. You lose that first home game, you are going to be extra motivated, there's that word again, to come back and give a stronger effort in that second home game. Now, the number 4 thing that we are looking for when handicapping the preseason is depth. Now, this one is kind of self-explanatory. right? Right now, rosters are at 90 players. So if you have 1 through 90, a team that is deeper and more talented than an opponent, which is maybe more front-loaded with star players or veterans who will be sitting out, that depth gives teams a massive advantage, all right? Basically, here's the breakdown for how teams treat the preseason. Week 1, starters and primary backups play the first quarter. Week 2, they play the first half. Week 3, they play into the third quarter. All right, but what does that mean? It means that no matter what week we are in, the fourth quarter, the money time, the guys that are making the plays and making decisions that really determine whether these bets win or lose, those are third and fourth string guys. So you really need to dig in and break down some of these rosters and some of these depth charts to find out who you are actually going to be backing in the fourth quarter. A deep bench goes a long way, and depth, especially in a position like the quarterback position, if your third string quarterback is a guy who is 6 or 7 years into the league, maybe he's never been anything more than a second or third string quarterback, but he's familiar with performing in these types of games, that's a huge advantage over a team that has maybe a rookie third or fourth string quarterback out of, the Sun Belt or the Mountain West. And, in that vein, you want to look for teams that have on their third and fourth string not a lot of rookies. You want guys that are in maybe their second, third, fourth, fifth training camp. Guys that, like I said, have played in these preseason games before. They know what it's like to play in the fourth quarter of a week 2 preseason game when there's 150 people in the stands, nobody on either sideline other than a few of the coaches are paying attention, but you still have to go out there and play football, perform, and try and scrounge for a roster spot or maybe a spot in the practice squad. I'll take guys that have been through those types of preseason situations over rookies that are still just adjusting to life in the NFL, the speed of the NFL game, going from playing in, the big house in Michigan to now playing in front of those 150 completely disaffected fans. So depth makes a big difference. Experience makes a big difference. And that's actually our number 5 thing, experience. Experience can have pros and cons to it when you're breaking down the NFL preseason. Here's the bad kind of experience. The bad kind of experience is what we talked about before. Veteran teams, veteran players, star players. Those guys aren't going to play in the preseason. So you have to handicap all of these teams based on their second, third, fourth string type of guys. I already touched on rookies versus scrubs, we'll call them, that have been in the preseason and performed on this platform before. Now, here's another type of experience that you don't really think about, and it's coaching experience. It's familiarity in the systems. Every season, you see a massive coaching turnover in the NFL. And it's not just head coaches. Teams bring in new offensive and new defensive coordinators every year. So if you have a team that is more established and more familiar with their offensive playbook and their defensive schemes, that's a massive advantage over a team that is bringing in new OCs and DCs and that are learning new systems and schemes. That's a very important thing to pay attention to, is which teams have new offensive coordinators, because that's going to impact, especially in those week 1 and week 2 games, the fluidity of their offense. And same thing on defense. A team might be shifting from a 3-4 to a 4-3 or vice versa. And how those teams perform in the preseason is going to directly correlate to how familiar they are with these schemes. So experience can be a good thing, can be a bad thing when we're talking about the NFL preseason. And the last thing that I want to touch on, kind of the 6th thing to look at, is when you're handicapping the preseason, numbers don't matter. Some of those fundamental mathematic things that are really important when you're betting on the regular season, things like key numbers, you can kind of throw those out the window when it comes to the NFL preseason. There is a wide variance in scores and performance in the NFL preseason. During the regular season, the difference between making a bet at -3 versus -3.5 can be massive. In my experience, that is not really the case during the NFL preseason. You have a lot of coaches, especially in the fourth quarter, that are coaching completely differently than they would during the regular season. If there's under 3 minutes left, they're not going to kick that field goal maybe that's going to tie up a game because they don't want to go to overtime. Or if they're down 6 running the 2-minute drill and they score a touchdown, they're not going to kick that extra point to tie a game up because, again, they just want to avoid overtime. They just want to get this game over with, so they're going to go for 2. So things like line movements, reverse line movements, some of the indicators that we might find during the regular season, throw those out the window. The books aren't getting a big enough handle during the NFL preseason where you have to really respect those line movements on the board in the weeks going up to the game. There can be a lot of knee-jerk reactions to the line based on which starters, which star players aren't playing, even though, as we already talked about, star players really don't impact the NFL preseason. It's more about second and third string guys. So, quick recap. Number 1, motivation. Motivation and competition are everything. Those are the teams that we want to bet on or against the teams that are more motivated to perform well during the preseason. Number 2, each week is its own season. All right, you can get whiplash betting the NFL preseason because of how wildly the swings are from week to week. Number 3, scheduling. Look for scheduling quirks that you can turn to your advantage with your handicapping. Number 4 is depth, especially quarterback depth. Number 5, experience, the pros and the cons. Older veteran teams, those guys aren't going to be playing and aren't going to be motivated in the preseason. Experience within a system, good. New offensive and defensive coordinators, probably not good. And number 6, ignore the numbers. So these are some of the things that are at the foundation of NFL preseason handicapping and NFL preseason betting. I know it's a lot, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight and gives you some things to focus on when you're looking at the numbers going into these games. If you do your homework and really stick to the basics during the NFL preseason, it is a beatable market. There is money to be made in the NFL preseason. I've been able to turn a profit in the NFL preseason 8 of the last 10 Augusts, and hopefully we'll be able to do so again this year. And that's the thing. If you don't want to do the work, if you don't want to do all the research into all these things that we discussed, that's why guys like me do what we do. At Doc Sports, our weekly package is just $49 during the NFL preseason. Or for $99, you get the entire month's worth of my preseason selections. So that's it for today. Thank you for dropping by. Be sure to look for more of my videos on YouTube. Subscribe to my channel as I will have Monday through Friday daily free pick videos. You can find more of my articles at www.docsports.com. And until then, carpe diem and good luck.